Hello, and thanks for stopping by. As we saw in the first instalment of this series, which I'll link below in case you missed it, London has provided the backdrop to countless music videos over the years. There are so many examples in fact, that it was impossible to squeeze them all into one episode, and so I think it's now time for a part 2. Many of the video locations we're about to see, which focus on the 1960s, 70s, 80s and 90s, were suggested in the comments on the last episode. There were hundreds of recommendations in fact, so a big thank you to all of you who took the time to write them down. I really do appreciate it, and already have more than enough material for a part 3, if that's something you'd like to see. On a similar note, I'll also be showing you a couple of videos featuring sites which, as of yet, I've not been able to identify. So please keep your eyes peeled and let me know if you think you can pinpoint them. As mentioned in part 1, copyright, as I'm sure you can appreciate, is a bit of a minefield when putting something like this together. So I've created a separate playlist where you can enjoy all of the music videos we're going to see in full. I've updated the map listing all of the locations too. You'll find links for both in the description below. Anyway, without any further ado, let's crack on. Although they began to emerge in the 1960s, music videos were still relatively rare during that decade, largely because they were so expensive to make. To begin with then, we'll look at the intro to a music film comedy, similar in style to the Beatles' Hard Day's Night. This example being 1965's Catch Us If You Can, which starred the Dave Clark Five, a group who formed in Tottenham in the late 1950s. The opening credits to Catch Us If You Can were shot in Tabard Gardens, Bermondsey. The tall building you can see in the background is the former Durant's factory on nearby Great Dover Street, which is now student accommodation. Sadly, the church, or as it's called here, the Action Enterprises Limited building, in which the Dave Clark Five live, complete with a gym and trampoline, has since been demolished and replaced with housing. Thanks in part to the Beatles song of the same name, Penny Lane is one of the most famous roads in Liverpool. It lies in the southeast of the city, not too far from Menlove Avenue, where John Lennon grew up. The video for Penny Lane, which was filmed over late December 1966 and early January 1967, was overseen by the Swedish director Peter Goldman. And although it does indeed feature clips of Penny Lane in Liverpool, you may be surprised to hear that much of it was in fact filmed in East London, on Stratford's Angel Lane to be precise. Angel Lane, which stood in for Penny Lane, has changed beyond all recognition since then. The area in which the Beatles filmed is now largely covered by the Stratford Shopping Centre, which opened in 1974. There is one clue which gives the location away though. If you look closely, you'll spot a poster behind the Beatles for the Theatre Royal Stratford, which stands at the very southern end of Angel Lane. The video for Penny Lane also features a few brief glimpses of a solo John Lennon walking along the King's Road in Chelsea, whilst the countryside scenes were filmed in Kent. Sticking with the Fab Four, this is one which many people mentioned in the last video, the Beatles' rooftop concert. This mini gig was filmed on the 30th of January 1969, on top of the group's Apple Corps building at number 3 Savile Row. The event is now marked by a blue plaque. The Beatles' rooftop concert marked their last ever live performance together, and John Lennon closed the set by saying, "I would like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we passed the audition." Born in Kent in 1944 and raised in Croydon, folk singer Ralph McTell's most famous song is, by far, The Streets of London, which he first recorded in 1969. This promo was filmed in 1971, and as you can see, it was shot within the grounds of St Paul's Cathedral. According to Ralph McTell, the lyrics were initially inspired by Paris, although he came to realise that he was subconsciously writing about his home city. We'll jump forward now to a very different style of music indeed, the incendiary God Save the Queen, which was released in 1977, the year of Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, by the Sex Pistols. The best known film footage of God Save the Queen is the clip you see shown here, which was filmed at the Marquee Club on Wardour Street. We encountered the Jam in the previous video when we saw their very cool promo for News of the World, which was shot on top of Battersea Power Station in 1978. The following year, they made a video for their single When You're Young, which was filmed around Kilburn. This featured the band and a group of local kids running up and down an escalator at the Kilburn Square shopping centre, a place which, as you can see, is currently a building site. A far more peaceful location, and the place where most of the video for When You're Young was made, is nearby Queen's Park, where the Jam played at the park's Victorian bandstand. Unfortunately, while making this video, I heard the sad news that Rick Buckler, the Jam's drummer, had passed away at the age of 69. The Jam have long been one of my favourite bands, and Rick was an incredible drummer. I'd like to dedicate this video to his memory. Another notable act to emerge from the punk era were X-Ray Spex, who were fronted by the Bromley-born and Brixton-raised Marianne Jane Elliott Said, aka Polystyrene. The video for X-Ray Spex' 1978 record, Identity, features footage shot amongst the old warehouses in Shad Thames, which at that time was all but derelict. Broadcast from the BBC Television Centre on Wood Lane in Shepherd's Bush between 1971 and 1988, the Old Grey Whistle Test was an important late-night music programme, which, during its time, showcased a great many live sets by up-and-coming artists. In the 1970s, some of the most notable appearances were David Bowie performing 5 Years, Oh You Pretty Things and Queen Bitch in 1972, Bob Marley and the Wailers, who in May 1973 played a set from their groundbreaking album Catch a Fire, Talking Heads, who performed a set in 1978, including a famous rendition of Psycho Killer, and also in 1978, Meatloaf, who, along with Carla DeVito, belted out a 12 minutes long version of Paradise by the Dashboard Lights, which culminated in an utterly bonkers piece of improvised theatre. Thanks to being at the top of the chart between December 1979 and January 1980, Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 holds the accolade of being the last UK number one of the 1970s and the first of the 1980s, and you could also say that it's the bleakest Christmas number one ever made. The video opens with a panning shot of London skyline, which looked very different compared to today of course, before zooming down onto King Square Gardens, which is sited in Islington, just north of the Barbican Centre. Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, aka OMD, were a pioneering electronic synth band who formed on Merseyside in the late 70s. In 1980, the group came to Tobacco Dock in Wapping, which at the time, and like the rest of London's docklands, lay in an abandoned state, to film the video for their single, Messages. When compared to how it appeared here, Tobacco Dock is now completely unrecognisable. It was turned into a shopping centre in the early 1990s, in the hope that it would thrive in a manner similar to Covent Garden. These ornamental ships were added as part of that development. The venture failed though, largely due to Tobacco Dock being somewhat off the beaten track. although in more recent years, the former warehouse has found a new lease of life. It now serves as a popular private events venue. Breaking the Law, which was recommended by a number of viewers in the last video, was made by Judas Priest, who, like many of the greatest heavy metal bands, hailed from the West Midlands. Directed by Julian Temple, Breaking the Law is set mainly in Soho, back when Soho was a very seedy place indeed, and it shows the band robbing a bank armed with guitars. One of the first shots in the video shows Soho Square, followed by a brief glimpse of the Golden Goose Arcade, now the Old Compton Brasserie, on Old Compton Street, which just a few years before had been the site of a gangland murder. The bank itself, meanwhile, is on the corner of Frith Street and Bateman Street. The building is now home to a Japanese restaurant. Following their heavy metal heist, Judas Priest then make their getaway in a Cadillac, speeding along Oxford Street and then out onto the elevated Westway. There is one scene in the Breaking the Law video which I've not been able to identify. This alleyway. Do you have any ideas? Squeeze, who were formed in Deptford in 1974, are famous for writing one of the greatest ever pop songs to allude to an area of London. That being Up the Junction, which contains references to Clapham. There is a video for Up the Junction, although it is filmed just outside the capital, at Tittenhurst Park in Berkshire, in, believe it or not, John Lennon's kitchen. In 1980, Squeeze shot another video, this time for Another Nail in My Heart, which features a young Jules Holland pushing a piano around the streets. However, although I've heard these scenes were filmed around Battersea, I've not been able to pinpoint exactly where, not helped by the fact that the area has been heavily redeveloped in the years since. Do you recognise any of these locations? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments, as it's a mystery I'd love to see solved. One of the most requested videos in the previous instalment, and rightly so, was Vienna by Ultravox, scenes for which were filmed in Covent Garden, right beside St Paul's Church, which was designed by Inigo Jones and opened in 1633. Our next video, See You, made by the Essex-formed band Depeche Mode in 1982, may well be the most nostalgic one on this list. It opens at Hounslow British Rail Station, where the lead singer, David Gahan, comes across a photo booth, back when passport photos only cost 40p or so, and were provided in black and white. The video then progresses to the Hounslow branch of Woolworths. Remember those? Complete with chintzy lampshades, chunky electronic children's toys, and a department selling vinyl records and VHS tapes. There's still a large shop at this site in Hounslow, although it's now a clothing store. When she was in the Eurythmics, Annie Lennox was the queen of style, appearing in all manner of costumes and guises. In Love is a Stranger, for example, she plays 3 different characters alone, whilst fellow bandmate Dave Stewart sits outside examining a device which bears a remarkable resemblance to a modern mobile phone. Quite something considering this dates from 1982. Love is a Stranger was filmed around Warwick Avenue, namely Clifton Gardens, which is just a few minutes from St Saviour's Church. It was at St Saviour's, also in 1982, that the Sheffield band, the Human League, filmed scenes for Love Action. Another location associated with the Human League can be found further east, out in Plaistow, on the junction of 3rd Avenue and 1st Avenue, where in 1983 they came to shoot the video for Keep Feeling Fascination. Back then, 3rd and 1st Avenue contained a large number of derelict properties, which were due for demolition, and so the film crew were permitted to paint a huge orange circle over the area. Not long after the video was made, the old buildings were indeed knocked down, and replaced with more modern housing. Whilst we're on the subject of residential areas in East London, one place I've not been able to pinpoint is this row of houses, which appears briefly at the beginning of Herbie Hancock's Rockit. Directed by Godley and Cream, Rockit features a collection of rather disturbing dancing sculptures, which were created by the artist Jim Whiting, who'd had them exhibited at the Hayward Gallery on the South Bank. The creepy figures were apparently cavorting around this property, which I've heard was in East London, although it could be elsewhere. Do you recognise this estate? Originally known as the New Sonics, Orange Juice were a band who formed in Glasgow in 1976. Their best known song, Rip It Up, was released in late 1982 and entered the charts in February 1983, which led to the recording of this promo. Even though the group are wearing Hawaiian shirts, you can tell it was indeed February and a freezing cold day. Rip It Up was shot in the West End, namely along Oxford Street and Regent Street, along with Gerrard Street in Chinatown. Although savagely panned at the time, Paul McCartney's 1984 film, Give My Regards to Broad Street, is, in my opinion, an important piece of media, for it contains footage of the now long-lost Broad Street railway terminal, which once stood next door to Liverpool Street Station. Broad Street, which opened in 1865, served routes running to and from the North London suburbs, but by 1984 its days were numbered. The old terminal was demolished in 1986, and the site is now covered by the large Broadgate complex. Another location featured in Paul McCartney's film, which thankfully is still standing and in business, is the Old Justice pub on Bermondsey Wall East. The Old Justice also appeared in a video for the single No More Lonely Nights, which was released in September 1984 to coincide with the release of Give My Regards to Broad Street. These connections are celebrated with a plaque displayed outside the pub. Another pub used in an 80s music video is the Princess Victoria, which stands on the corner of Oxbridge Road and Becklow Road in Shepherd's Bush. This pub was once owned by Richard Branson, and it was here, in 1985, that Phil Collins filmed the promo for Sussudio, a song which is now known as being a personal favourite of the fictional serial killer Patrick Bateman from American Psycho.
Do you like Phil Collins?
On the 13th of July 1985, Phil Collins performed at both the Live Aid charity concerts on the same day, first at Wembley, then over 3,500 miles away in Philadelphia, a feat which was achieved thanks to a flight on Concorde. David Bowie and Mick Jagger, meanwhile, had a slightly less glamorous task. Initially, it was hoped the pair could perform a cover of Martha and the Vandellas' 1964 hit Dancing in the Street, together at Live Aid via a satellite link-up, with Bowie in London and Jagger in Philadelphia. However, it was soon realised that the slight time delay on the satellite feed meant this wouldn't be practical, and so the two legends decided instead to perform the song together on a record which could be sold for charity. The Bowie-Jagger version of Dancing in the Street was cobbled together very quickly indeed, with both the studio recording and filming for the promo being completed within just 13 hours. The video, which was shot out in London's crumbling docklands, specifically Spiller's Millennium Mills, a derelict flour mill close to what's now London City Airport, has gone down in music history as being one of the unintentionally funniest videos ever made, with the pair hopping and bouncing around the ruins like excited children. How two of the coolest men on the planet ended up looking like this is anyone's guess, although it's rumoured some form of illicit substance may have been involved. Further west along the Thames from Spiller's Mill, and another once derelict spot which we saw earlier with X-ray Spex, is Shad Thames, where, as many people in the previous video noted, Katrina and the Waves made their video for Walking on Sunshine, which even managed to make Tower Bridge look bleak. Another video which was mentioned many times by viewers in part 1 was Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. So many times in fact, that I think I'd be in trouble if I didn't include it here. So here we go. It's quite something to note that, at the time of making this video, Never Gonna Give You Up has accumulated over 1.5 billion views on YouTube. This video was shot in the area known as Nottingdale, the locations being inside the Harrow Youth Club on Preston Road, where you can see this ornate window, and just a few seconds away, the brick arches which carry trains on the Circle and Hammersmith and City lines, just around the corner from Latimer Road Station. Our first video of the 1990s is Saturday Night, which was recorded by Suede, a band who'd formed at University College London in the late 1980s. And a special thanks, by the way, to the lovely Jeff Marshall for recommending this one. Saturday Night was shot at Holborn Tube Station, on both the escalators and the disused platform of the short Aldwych branch, which it closed to the public in 1994. The video is notable for starring a then relatively unknown Keely Hawes. She was only in her early 20s when this was made. We saw the Verve in the previous instalment, when, in Bittersweet Symphony, Richard Ashcroft strides along Hoxton Street, rudely barging into random passers-by. This led a number of people to ask where the video for the Verve's 1997 song Lucky Man was recorded, as it was clearly somewhere alongside the Thames. Well, the answer is, it was here, this building at Thames Wharf Studios, just off of Rainville Road, close to Hammersmith Bridge. The building, which is now home to the River Cafe, was unveiled in 1987, its architects being Richard Rogers, who also designed the Lloyd's Building, the Millennium Dome, and the Pompidou Centre in Paris. 1997's Come to Daddy, a track created by the electronic music producer Richard D. James, aka Aphex Twin, spawned what's generally regarded to be one of the most terrifying music videos ever made, featuring children with adult faces, a demonic entity on a flickering television set, and some sort of hideous hellbeast which roars in an old lady's face. These disturbing sequences were filmed around Tavy Bridge on the Thamesmead estate, which was thankfully a little calmer when I came here to film. Hey Boy, Hey Girl by the Manchester duo The Chemical Brothers is one of the catchiest tunes of the late 90s. The video for it was made at two London locations. The first is the beautiful Natural History Museum in South Kensington, where a girl on a school trip wanders around in awe of the prehistoric skeletons. The dinosaur she's looking at here is a replica of a Diplodocus skeleton, affectionately known as Dippy, which once held a pride of place in the museum's main entrance hall. It's now displayed at the Herbie Arts Gallery and Museum in Coventry. Today, the main hall is dominated by the huge skeleton of a blue whale. In the second part of this video, we see the girl as an adult, on a night out at the Ministry of Sound nightclub near Elephant and Castle, and she still has a fascination with skeletons, seeing the other clubbers in an eerie X-ray vision. Finally, we have Turn Back Time, which was released by the Danish group Aqua as part of the soundtrack to the 1998 film Sliding Doors. The premise of the film, which starred Gwyneth Paltrow, was an interesting one, containing two stories set along divergent timelines, the split occurring at the moment when Gwyneth Paltrow's character, Helen, attempts to board a tube train. On one timeline she makes it, on the other she misses it, creating two separate fates. Sliding Doors was filmed at the Waterloo end of the Waterloo and City line, although Aqua's video, like Suede's Saturday Night, which we saw earlier, was shot on the old Aldwych branch platforms at Holborn. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this second look at London's music video locations, and as always, I would love to hear your own thoughts. Do you recognise any of the mystery sites? And what other music video locations can you think of? Please do keep them coming. If you haven't yet subscribed to Rob's London, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure that you don't miss out whenever I publish a new video. Plus, of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.